The Japanese cooks began their new duties the following morning, entering a work environment unlike anything they had experienced before the war. The American field kitchen was designed for efficiency and scale. It operated less as a traditional kitchen and more as a streamlined logistical point where ingredients moved through a structured sequence: washing, cutting, boiling, portioning, with each process timed and measured. For the recently captured cooks, this system appeared both ordered and unfamiliar, and adapting to it required careful observation. The ingredients themselves posed a challenge. The supplies available in the camp differed substantially from the limited rations they had used before capture. American shipments included large quantities of canned vegetables, powdered products, dried beans, tinned meats, flour, and preserved items that rarely appeared in Japanese military stockpiles. These foods were selected for durability and ease of transport, not for flavor or cultural familiarity. Preparing them required learning new methods, as the textures and cooking times varied significantly from the rice-based, fish-oriented diets the Japanese cooks were accustomed to. Under the supervision of American personnel, the cooks began organizing their tasks according to the established routine. They were instructed to maintain punctual mealtimes, follow sanitation rules strictly, and prepare large volumes of food on short notice. The kitchen's large metal boilers produced steam that filled the air with a constant haze, and the rhythmic sound of metal utensils echoed across the facility. The cooks quickly realized that this environment demanded steady coordination rather than creativity. Their work shifted from producing meals that reflected familiarity to sustaining large groups under tight constraints. Yet certain skills transferred easily. Their experience with rationing and improvisation proved particularly valuable. Japanese military kitchens had often operated with limited ingredients, requiring efficient use of every available component. This background made them adept at measuring, organizing, and minimizing waste abilities the American personnel recognized quickly. These strengths allowed the cooks to integrate into the work process without disrupting the kitchen's flow. As days passed, they became aware of another challenge: portion control. American military rations were calculated based on energy requirements, climate, and workload. Each meal had to meet defined calorie and nutrient standards. Japanese cooks were accustomed to smaller portions, structured around rice and vegetables, supplemented by proteins when available. Adjusting to the much larger meal sizes required by American regulations demanded precise scaling and constant oversight. The cooks also had to adapt to the kitchen's water systems. Unlike their previous posts, the camp used filtration and heating stations to manage water supply. Maintaining these systems required coordination, as any interruption could delay meal preparation for thousands of people. The cooks learned to monitor water levels, adjust boiler temperatures, and maintain a steady flow to each preparation station. Although language barriers remained, basic communication became possible through gestures, demonstrations, and written instructions prepared by camp staff. In this largely nonverbal environment, efficiency depended on observation rather than conversation. The Americans supervising the kitchen avoided unnecessary interaction but ensured that the process remained organized and safe. The relationship between guards and cooks stabilized into a predictable pattern: oversight, instruction, and quiet cooperation. Outside the kitchen, the presence of Japanese cooks altered the routines of the camp's prisoner population. Fellow prisoners received meals prepared by their own countrymen, which created a subtle sense of familiarity. Even though the ingredients were different, the cook's attention to consistency and cleanliness brought a measure of routine to camp life. Food distribution became more organized, and mealtime lines moved with fewer delays. For the American personnel, the cook's involvement eased pressure on an overextended kitchen staff. Their reliability reduced the likelihood of shortages or delays. Their diligence in maintaining equipment and managing supplies improved overall efficiency. Though no formal acknowledgement occurred, the camp's operations benefited noticeably from the additional skilled labor. As the weeks passed, the cooks developed a functional understanding of the workflow. They learned how to balance quantities, maintain sanitation, operate American equipment, and adapt unfamiliar ingredients into large-scale meals. Their early confusion gave way to routine. Despite their status as prisoners, they approached their duties with discipline, shaped by their military background and the culture of responsibility that had defined their service. Yet beneath the surface of this routine, each of them remained acutely aware of the broader circumstances. They were still far from home, confined within a structured environment, and dependent on the stability of the camp's systems. Their role was practical, not voluntary. And although they were treated according to the standards of the time, their future remained uncertain. Still, their work in the kitchen formed a unique intersection of necessity and skill. What began as an unexpected assignment would soon evolve into a sustained cooperation between individuals separated by language, culture, and the realities of war. A cooperation built not on ideology, but on the simple requirement to feed hundreds of people each day. Over time, the kitchen became a stable and predictable center of activity within the camp. Its routines operated like an internal engine that supported the daily structure for both prisoners and guards. By the third week of their assignment, the Japanese cooks had fully adjusted to the environment, following a sequence of tasks that repeated with little variation. Preparing ingredients, operating boilers, managing portions, and ensuring cleanliness. Although they remained under supervision, their presence had shifted from an unexpected addition to an essential part of the camp's daily operations. One of the main challenges they faced involved the adaptation of unfamiliar ingredients into workable meals. Much of the American-provided food consisted of preserved items designed to withstand long transport across the Pacific. These included various canned products, condensed soups, powdered eggs, dehydrated vegetables, and tinned meats. The cooks had gradually developed methods to rehydrate and combine these ingredients into meals that could be produced consistently. Their work required precision and timing, as the kitchen's output needed to align with the rigid eating schedule enforced throughout the camp. The kitchen's environment remained physically demanding. The heat generated by the boilers filled the air with moisture, and the process of lifting heavy containers required strength and coordination. Despite these challenges, the cooks maintained discipline in their work. Their previous experience on remote islands had prepared them for long hours in confined spaces, and the kitchen's structured workflow offered a sense of predictability that contrasted sharply with the uncertainty of life outside the kitchen. Sanitation became a central component of their responsibilities. American regulations required strict cleanliness, especially given the large number of people relying on the kitchen. Waste needed to be removed promptly, surfaces disinfected, and equipment cleaned after every use. Although the procedures differed from Japanese military standards, the cooks quickly learned the system through observation. They were particularly attentive to the handling of perishable items, understanding that any lapse in sanitation could lead to health issues throughout the camp. As cooperation between the cooks and the American personnel increased, small adjustments were made to improve efficiency. The guards monitoring the kitchen noticed that the cooks could complete repetitive tasks quickly, allowing more time for complex steps, such as bulk preparation of starches or meat-based components. This gradual adaptation resulted in shorter meal distribution times, reducing congestion in the serving areas. The system worked so effectively that the camp command quietly expanded the cook's responsibilities to include certain storage management tasks, such as organizing crates and checking expiration dates on preserved food. For the Japanese cooks, the work provided a mental anchor during captivity. Although they lived under constraint and lacked certainty about their future, the structure of the kitchen offered a sense of purpose. Completing tasks on schedule, maintaining order, and ensuring that meals reached the prisoners gave them a daily objective. Their work did not change their situation, but it provided a stable framework within which they could operate. Meanwhile, the camp's general atmosphere began to reflect the improved organization of food distribution. The predictable arrival of meals reduced tension among the prisoners, many of whom relied heavily on these structured routines to manage the monotony of captivity. The American personnel also noted fewer supply-related issues. With the cooks maintaining the equipment and ensuring efficient use of resources, the likelihood of shortages decreased. Despite the cooperative nature of the kitchen environment, the cooks remained conscious of the boundaries set by the camp authorities. They followed instructions carefully, avoided actions that could be misinterpreted, and adhered strictly to their assigned roles. The relationship between the cooks and the American guards rested on mutual practicality rather than trust. Yet within this narrow framework, day-to-day cooperation continued to strengthen. Food preparation eventually evolved into a process in which each participant understood their role precisely. One group handled washing and sorting ingredients, another managed the large boilers, and others took charge of distribution. The seamless coordination reduced the chances of mistakes, and the kitchen operated with an efficiency comparable to a well-trained military unit. The experience also broadened the cooks' practical understanding of food systems. They learned to adapt to large-scale production, manage diverse ingredients, and maintain equipment unfamiliar to them before captivity. While these skills developed under constrained circumstances, they formed an important part of their daily activity and would later influence how some of them approached their post-war lives. In the broader context of the camp, the kitchen symbolized a rare point of functional cooperation during wartime. It demonstrated how individuals from opposing sides could align around tasks rooted in basic human needs. With each passing day, the cook's integration into the kitchen blurred the boundaries of their status, not in terms of authority, but in terms of operational necessity. As the weeks continued, the routine became deeply embedded. The cooks did not know how long they would remain in the camp, or what awaited them after the war's end. But in the confined world of the kitchen, they found a rhythm that allowed them to navigate captivity with measured stability, a rhythm sustained by their skills, discipline, and the universal requirement to provide food for hundreds of people. As months passed, the kitchen became one of the most stable and predictable structures within the camp. It functioned as a controlled system where necessity outweighed ideology and where routine gradually replaced the uncertainty that had marked the early stages of captivity. For the Japanese cooks, the transition from confusion to adaptation had occurred steadily. By this stage, they had become integral to the daily functioning of the camp's food operations. Their responsibilities expanded gradually but remained well within the boundaries permitted by wartime regulations. They now managed portions of the storage rooms, oversaw the preparation of basic ingredients, and maintained several pieces of equipment that required constant attention. Their familiarity with repetitive tasks, as well as their discipline, made them reliable participants in the kitchen's workflow. The American personnel supervising them recognized this reliability and adjusted schedules to make better use of the cook's efficiency. The environment itself changed with the seasonal shifts. Periods of heavy rain or intense heat affected the camp, but the kitchen maintained a consistent rhythm. The boilers produced constant steam, and the work areas required regular maintenance to counteract humidity. Despite these conditions, the cooks continued to perform their tasks with measured accuracy. They maintained the habits that had shaped their service before capture: attention to order, careful measurement, and quiet persistence. Food preparation became a point of connection between opposing sides. Even if the connection was purely functional, the meals the cooks produced were consumed by both prisoners and guards. Although the preparations followed American standards, the cooks brought a degree of structure rooted in their own training. Their efficient handling of ingredients reduced waste, improved distribution times, and contributed to smoother camp operations. The American personnel, while maintaining strict control, acknowledged the practical value of this arrangement. They adhered to established guidelines for the treatment of prisoners, ensuring that the cooks worked under safe conditions. The environment remained controlled, but not hostile. The guards' oversight ensured order, while the cooks' cooperation provided predictability. This balance created a kind of mutual dependence, shaped entirely by operational needs. For the prisoners outside the kitchen, the improvements in meal consistency provided a degree of stability in daily life. Regular schedules, cleaner distribution areas, and predictable portions helped reduce tension. The cooks became a quiet but important factor in maintaining this equilibrium, even though most prisoners never interacted with them directly. Their work remained largely unseen, but its effects were felt throughout the camp. Despite the relative calm inside the kitchen, the cooks did not forget their circumstances. They remained aware that their situation depended on forces beyond their control, the progress of the war, the decisions of camp authorities, and the rules governing prisoner of war treatment. Yet the structured nature of their duties gave them something many prisoners lacked: a defined role. This role did not change their status, but it offered a framework that made captivity more bearable. Over time, the kitchen developed a rhythm comparable to that of a functioning unit. Tasks were completed with minimal instruction, and the cooks understood the expectations placed upon them. Their cooperation formed a quiet demonstration of how skill and discipline could transcend the boundaries of war when directed toward basic human needs. By the end of their tenure in the camp, the cook's contribution had become an inseparable part of the camp's daily reality. They had entered the kitchen as captives, unfamiliar with the environment, and emerged as essential participants in its operation. When the war eventually drew to a close and repatriation began, their departure marked the end of a unique chapter, one defined not by confrontation, but by an unexpected collaboration rooted in routine, necessity, and the universal requirement to feed those who depended on them. In the latter half of the Second World War, the Pacific Theater had become a vast system of logistical, naval, and ground operations that steadily pushed the front line closer to the Japanese home islands. American forces advanced island by island, confronting both fortified defensive positions and isolated garrisons cut off from supply routes. As a result, American prisoner of war camps began receiving increasing numbers of exhausted Japanese servicemen. Among them were not only combat personnel but also support specialists, including a small group of military cooks captured after the surrender of an isolated garrison. One such camp, established on a relatively large island, functioned as a redistribution center for prisoners. It consisted of multiple separated sections and was under constant supervision by American military personnel. Prisoners came from different units, but the group of Japanese cooks stood out. These men had no involvement in frontline combat. Their responsibilities had been limited to food preparation, rationing, and maintaining basic sustenance for their garrison under conditions of chronic shortages and irregular supply deliveries. Upon arrival, they found themselves in an environment that differed significantly from the rigid structure of the Japanese military. The camp did not operate on harsh disciplinary measures, but instead on a controlled and systematic security routine. American personnel performed regular inventory checks of food stores, enforced sanitary regulations, and assigned tasks to prisoners in a manner intended to maintain order and stable living conditions. While the prisoners were required to participate in various work details, cleaning, repairs, cargo sorting, food preparation was not initially included in their duties. This changed when the camp faced a growing challenge in organizing its food supply. American field cooks working in the camp's kitchen facilities became understaffed after several were reassigned to support expanding troop concentrations on nearby islands. At the same time, the camp received several large groups of new prisoners, significantly increasing the number of people who needed daily meals. logistics grew strained, and the available personnel could not sustain the required output. The difficulty lay not only in the number of mouths to feed, but also in the nature of the available supplies. The island received regular shipments of canned goods, dried mixtures, grains, vegetables, and preserved meat, but their distribution required careful management. American cooks were trained to operate under limitations, yet the workload exceeded their capacity. The camp's leadership now faced the necessity of reallocating human resources to maintain the required ration standards and sanitary conditions. It was at this moment that attention turned to the Japanese cooks. From a practical standpoint, utilizing trained culinary specialists, even from among prisoners, appeared to be a reasonable solution. International regulations prohibited the use of prisoners for military operations or hazardous labor, but participation in essential camp maintenance, including cooking, was permitted as long as it contributed to general living conditions. Moreover, involving prisoners in improving their own environment aligned with accepted standards of wartime administration. When the Japanese cooks were assembled and informed of their new assignment, they felt a mixture of surprise and confusion. Their time in captivity had not yet reshaped their expectations, and their understanding of American camps was based largely on rumors and assumptions. They imagined the relationship between captors and prisoners in much stricter terms, influenced by their own military experience. The announcement that they would be required to work in the kitchen, preparing meals not only for fellow prisoners but also for American personnel, seemed completely unexpected. The camp's kitchen area was located in a separate, secure section, equipped with storage rooms, large boilers, water filtration systems, and food preparation tables. Access for prisoners was restricted to specific zones deemed safe. An assigned guard detail monitored all activity and enforced hygiene protocols. The tasks given to the Japanese cooks were strictly practical: organize meal preparation, maintain cleanliness, ensure consistent portioning, and keep meal schedules stable. This marked a new stage of adaptation for the cooks. They were unfamiliar with many of the ingredients, which differed significantly from the supplies they had used in Japan and its outposts. They also had to adjust to new organizational methods, kitchen layout, and sanitary standards that followed American regulations. Nevertheless, the demands of the situation brought them into a role that supported both the prisoners and the camp personnel. In this way, the participation of Japanese cooks in the camp's food operations began as an unexpected development. Their circumstances were shaped not by ideology or confrontation, but by the practical needs of maintaining daily life in a wartime environment. What followed would become an example of how individuals on opposing sides of a global conflict were sometimes brought into cooperation through necessity, forming a story that blended discipline, adaptation, and the shared requirement to sustain life under restrictive conditions.